Savannah had few modern conveniences to offer its first settlers, or its second settlers. It was a new town in a new nation, promising perhaps equal parts of opportunity and hardship to all who settled on the bluffs of the Savannah River, 15 miles from the ocean that brought them here. The city was almost 90 years old, but still young when the first heavy immigration of Irish settlers began in Savannah about 1819 and 1820. Most of them were uneducated and poor and had few possessions. But we still have something that they brought with them, the spirit that shaped this city and the way it celebrates St. Patrick's Day. Hi, I'm Brent Davis. Join us tonight as we take a look at Savannah's passing parade. Many of us learned in some forgettable history class that the potato famine forced many of the Irish to leave their land for the United States. Some did, but the first Irish immigrants who came to Savannah in about 1820 left Ireland about 20 years before the potato famine. They came here for the same reasons most everyone else did, freedom and opportunity. As Catholics, they had been stifled in their own country by oppressive English rule. Catholics were not allowed to own land in Ireland, and they could not hold a seat in Parliament. Many of them were farmers and were poorly educated. There was little hope that things would be getting any better for them in Ireland. When Georgia was a colony, Catholics were much more welcome here. It was feared they would be sympathetic to France and Spain because of their Catholic monarchs. They might even side with those rival powers if there was an attack. But when Georgia became one of the United States, there were no such bans on religion. Opportunities opened up for these Irish Catholics. If you're one of the first Irish settlers in the city of Savannah, and chances are you're not, you might have lived around here, Washington Square. This is located on the east side of the city in what's called the Old Fort section of town. Fort Wayne, built to defend Savannah in the War of 1812, is located just around the corner. The first Irishmen in the city of Savannah worked mostly as farmers and laborers. They probably performed the dangerous work down at the river, for instance. If a black slave was crushed and killed by a heavy cotton bale, his owner had lost a very important investment. If an Irish immigrant was killed, a $5 gift to his widow would take care of things. These Irish immigrants soon began societies and charitable organizations to help such widows or penniless families who had just arrived in Savannah from the old country. Helping each other out was a native custom, just like celebrating St. Patrick's Day. In 1822, one of these groups, the Hibernians, celebrated that holiday with a banquet ending with 32 toasts, including ones to Ireland, the Emerald Isle, the United States, the Navy, the Army, the militia, Georgia, the memory of President Washington, and woman, heaven's dearest, loveliest gift. Once they got back home to their wives after 32 toasts, they may have had other words to describe her. In 1824, it doesn't seem like there would have been much to celebrate. A fire 3 years earlier had destroyed half the town, as shown in this engraving during the time. In addition, Savannah, as well as the rest of the nation, was feeling the effects of a devastating depression. We like to think times are tough now, but men were losing money, work, hope, and pride. But perhaps they were the fortunate ones. Nearly 700 Savannians died in a yellow fever epidemic. Many of them are buried in this cemetery. Despite such hardships, the Irish in the city celebrated St. Patrick's Day, and for the first time they invited the general public to join them for a parade. The paper the next day said it was celebrated with unusual spirit. The holiday had been celebrated for centuries in Ireland. St. Patrick is Ireland's patron saint, beloved because he brought Christianity to the country. The holiday there is celebrated as a worship period. But unlike here, there are no grand parties or boisterous parades. Savannah's St. Patrick's Day celebration would change as its participants became Americanized. Since the 1820s, practically the only thing that has interrupted our celebrating St. Patrick's Day with a parade has been war. And in 1861, it was not only a difficult time to celebrate a holiday, it was a difficult time to live in Savannah. With the firing of the first shot at Fort Sumter, Savannah's men had enthusiastically marched away to Virginia and Tennessee to fight for the Confederacy. Most of the city's 22,000 residents were just as enthusiastic about seceding from the Union. But they knew that Savannah might be attacked. After all, it was an important port, and the North could easily invade from the sea. So, with the confidence that characterized the South at the beginning of the war, the town began defending itself with a series of forts, batteries, and marine obstructions around Tybee and the local sounds, rivers, and creeks. The city was confident it could defend itself from invasion. But the very next year, the fort between the city and the sea was captured by the Union. Fort Pulaski was to rifled shells what the Titanic was to icebergs. Suddenly, the enemy was just a few miles away from the city, and everyone feared an attack. And while there was no shortage of fear, there was a shortage of most everything else. A Union blockade had all but shut down the port. Savannah was almost a city under siege. But when the invasion finally came, it came from the north, not from the sea. General William T. Sherman's troops advanced on the city, leaving behind a charred path of destruction. They captured Savannah in December of 1864, in time for Sherman to give Savannah to President Lincoln as a Christmas present. It spent the rest of the war as an occupied city. In 1866, one of the last parades the city of Savannah had seen was when Sherman's troops marched down Bay Street. There really hadn't been any St. Patrick's Day parades because of the war. So there was plenty to celebrate with the St. Patrick's Day parade that year. The war was over, the survivors were back home, and Savannah was not burned to the ground like other cities in Sherman's wake. Newspaper accounts of St. Patrick's Day in 1866 say it was celebrated in an appropriate manner. The celebration ended that night when the Irish Union Society met at 110 East Bryan Street for a grand anniversary supper. But Savannah had more to get going after the war between the states than its St. Patrick's Day parade. The fighting had virtually stopped enterprise and commerce in the city. It was time to get back to business. And the business at hand was to make the Savannah River navigable again. Efforts began to clear the channel of gunboats and other obstacles. During the war, they had kept enemy ships out of the port. Now, after the war, they were keeping friendly ships away. Another casualty of the war were the railroads that brought goods to the port. But by the end of 1866, the Savannah Daily Herald was able to boast that the Central of Georgia Railroad was being relayed at the rate of 1 mile a day. There were new businesses started that year, too, like a broom factory and a cracker factory, where no one complained of the crummy work. But after the war, Savannah was not concerned with all the booming business as much as it was one blooming business, cotton. If it was king before the war, its reign was just that much stronger afterwards. There was plenty of land to grow it, plenty of hands to pick it, and plenty of people wanting to buy it. At the peak of its cotton kingdom, Savannah was shipping 2 million bales on 2,000 vessels a year. The biggest problem the city faced was disease. Hundreds died in fever epidemics in the 1870s. Savannah's Irish community prospered with the rest of the city. Its members assumed positions of prominence and importance in the city, and the children were getting something many of their parents didn't have, an education. The number of Irish societies grew. Participation in the St. Patrick's Day parade increased because it wasn't a day just for the Irish. It was a day for the entire city to celebrate. The parade became more elaborate. So did the cleanup chores afterwards. Until the 1880s, most Savannians, out of necessity, lived close to where they worked. But then transportation in the city developed. There was the horse-drawn streetcar, then the electric trolley, and a few other less practical and memorable means of locomotion. The city began stretching out, and the first suburbs, like the Victorian District and Ardsley Park, were built. The shady city by the sea was turning into a city of hustle and bustle. But by the end of the century, King Cotton had been dethroned. Fortunately, Savannah, unlike much of the South, had a diverse enough economy to keep the city prosperous. At the turn of the century, Savannah was ready for a turn for the better. For nearly half a century, the centerpiece of Savannah's St. Patrick's Day Parade was at Liberty and West Broad Streets in the Irish community called Frogtown. Participants would gather in the morning for Mass at St. Patrick's Church and Rectory and line up for the parade outside afterwards. By the 20th century, Savannah was growing up, literally. And while the buildings that dominated the skyline weren't exactly skyscrapers, downtown Savannah was beginning to get the big city look. But the most important element of the city had hardly changed at all. The river was still the key to the economy. In 1916, more steamship routes were established, and the docks of the Ocean Steamship Company, described as the most modern in existence, had just been completed. More factories were being built beyond the city on the river, too. But one of the newest industries in the city didn't require factories. Mayor Wallace J. Pierpont, who received a salary of $6,000, was able to brag that a greater number of conventioneers and tourists were visiting Savannah. It was enough business to warrant construction of the 10-story Hicks Hotel. Like other thriving cities, Savannah soon gave up the horse for horsepower. And while Ford's flivver was a convenience, it didn't always get the driver out of his rut. In fact, sometimes the machines were enough to make the owners a little cranky. The St. Patrick's Day Parade of 1916 was described as one of the longest parades the Irish ever had, with thousands lining the streets to see favorite units like the Benedictine Cadets. The newspaper reported that nothing happened to hamper the fullest enjoyment of the Sons of Erin. After the parade, you could have taken advantage of the 15-cent roast beef dinner at DeVore's Meal-a-Minute Diner. Reading the newspaper between bites, you would have seen that the nation was more worried about Pancho Villa in Mexico than the Kaiser in Europe. An advertisement would have informed you that any woman who cares how she looks, feels, breathes, and eats must look to her corset. One editor noted that in Atlanta, the girl with big hips is in style again. She may have been out of style, but she's always been in Atlanta, he observed. And in a report on the day's festivities in Savannah, you would have read that so many descendants of Ireland can be found all over the earth that it is surprising that any of them are left in Ireland. Today, many of them are in Savannah.
Once I built a tower up to the sun, brick.
By the 1930s, Savannah may have looked forward to its St. Patrick's Day Parade like never before. The country was at the bottom of the Depression, and there wasn't much cause to celebrate the rest of the year. In 1933, one-third of the country's workers were jobless. Industrial production was down, and the run on the banks was threatening the stability of the nation. But there was a new president and new hope that something could be done. For some, that was enough to raise spirits. Others raised different kinds of spirits to celebrate the end of Prohibition, even though the Women's Christian Temperance Union warned that legal drinking was unconstitutional and would make women fat. If you wanted to forget about the hard times in Savannah, you may have gone to one of the city's most splendid and majestic structures, the DeSoto Hotel at Liberty and Bull. Anybody who was anybody went to the DeSoto to dine, to dance, to see and be seen. But that wasn't the only kind of entertainment to be found inside. In 1929, when WTOC radio went on the air, the station was located on top of the DeSoto Hotel. Just a second. For years, the hotel was also... Jeepers. For years, the hotel was also an important point along the parade route. Members of the county commission, dignitaries of the military, and members of the Hibernian Society would gather here to look at the passing parade. And since the radio station here was here too... Hey, thanks, buddy. Since the radio station was here too, they thought it might make a pretty good broadcast. After all, there was plenty of music, plenty of people to interview. You don't mind if we get a word with you later on, do you? And there might even be time for a commercial or two. WTOC radio float passes. A number of our attractive and comely female employees are at the helm. None of us men. They wouldn't let us appear in public. Ladies and gentlemen, from this vantage point, it looks as if that ban on street peddling did not pan out during this parade. Let's have another word from one of our fine sponsors. Ladies, Mrs. J.J. Looney of Olive Branch, Mississippi, wants you to know about Lydia E. Pinkham's vegetable compound for jumpy nerves. She says, "My nerves are steady and I have no pains or aches of any sort." Ask your druggist for Lydia E. Pinkham's vegetable compound for jumpy nerves. The Savannah Police Band is passing before us now, and although this is just a block from the end of this long... Well, to be perfectly frank with you, ladies and gentlemen, I've looked through my notes and I don't know who that is in that motor car passing before us now, and none of the dignitaries with me on the veranda seem to know either. So we'll take this opportunity to bring you this word from one of our fine sponsors. Your friends at the Grosseteria invite you to visit their fine stores and take advantage of these St. Patrick's Day specials. Yard fresh eggs, 2 dozen for 25 cents. Coastal coffee, 25 cents. Irish rose butter from Dublin, Georgia, 20 cents. That's the Grosseteria at 32 Barnard Street. Nothing's inferior at the Grosseteria. And now we see before our microphone Captain John Ladies and gentlemen, we can honestly report that the American Legion Drum and Bugle Corps is still stepping lively this far into the parade. Of course, you'd be stepping lively too if you were marching behind a mounted patrol. Psst, buddy, aren't you getting tired of standing still like that? Now this word from one of our sponsors. Ladies and gentlemen, Grove's laxative bromoquinine, taken at the first sign of a cold, will stop it cold before it can develop in your metabolism. Grove's laxative bromoquinine works because it opens stopped passages, kills cold germs and fever, and tones the system. Anything less is toying with your cold. That's Grove's laxative bromoquinine. Well, we're well into an hour of this parade, and I think so far the most thunderous ovation given by the audience at this vantage point.
Just as the city has grown in recent years, so too has the parade. Times have changed. In modern times, the route of the parade has changed too, but the ingredients haven't. There have always been clans and bands and followers and leaders. Tonight we've shown you the way things used to be. But there isn't any one parade that represents all the parades. Each is the product of all those before it. Whenever we look back at old pictures, we're tempted to laugh at the funny way people used to dress and shake our heads and feel smug about how much things have changed. But in a few years, others will do the same when they look back at us. So maybe instead we should think about how much things haven't changed, especially on St. Patrick's Day. It's still a holiday for the entire city, not just those of a certain heritage. And while the parade lasts only a morning, the spirit of its celebrants doesn't have to be forgotten.
Try to remember the kind of September when life was young and so mellow. Try to remember the kind of September when grass was green and grain was yellow. Try to remember September except the willow. Try to remember when life was so tender that love was an ember about to billow. Try to remember, and if you remember, then follow, 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 follow. Deep in December, it's nice to remember, although you know the snow will follow. Deep in December, it's nice to remember the fire of September.